The air was thick with the smell of sweat and despair, a cocktail that no one with any sense would pay a dime for, but here, it was free. At least Mercury had that going for it. Soren wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of grime like a war paint of futility. Around him, the clang of metal on metal was a symphony of lost hope, a grim reminder that humanity was not so much in the gutter as it was the dirt beneath it. The Drolk were as charming as a sack of angry spiders, but with fewer legs and more eyes. Their skin had the texture of a well-used leather boot, not that Soren was in the habit of caressing their alien hides. He was too busy pretending that the dull throb in his shoulder was a minor inconvenience, and not a sign that he was slowly being worked to death. "Hey, Soren," came a voice that was as smooth as broken glass. It belonged to Rallo, a fellow human who had the winning combination of a quick wit and a death wish. "You think if we keep this up, they'll let us borrow the ship for a weekend getaway?" Soren snorted, a sound that was some distant cousin to laughter. "Sure, Rallo, and maybe they'll throw in a picnic basket full of dreams and dignity." Rallo grinned, his teeth a patchwork of neglect and necessity. "Well, I hear dignity is highly overrated. Useless in a fight, I've been told." The two men were ankle-deep in filth, surrounded by machines that hummed with an indifference that was almost admirable. The Drolk watched from their perches, their eyes flicking over the humans like a butcher sizing up the next slice of meat. "You ever wonder why they keep us alive?" Soren asked, not really expecting an answer. Rallo shrugged, his shoulders moving in a way that suggested he had long ago stopped wondering about anything. "Maybe they like our singing voices," Rallo said. "Or maybe they think we're cute. Like hairless pets that occasionally try to stab them." Soren chuckled, despite himself. "If I'm anyone's pet, I want a new owner. One that doesn't find joy in watching me suffer." Above them, the ceiling of the mine was a tapestry of stalactites, each one a dripping reminder of the planet's attempt to drown out their misery. The oppressive heat was an unwelcome embrace, and the sweat that soaked their clothes was a constant companion. "You hear about the last group that tried to make a run for it?" Rallo asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Soren nodded. "Yeah, didn't make it far. Drolk don't take kindly to escape attempts." "No kidding. They strung em up like Christmas lights." Soren winced. "Festive." Rallo leaned in closer, his voice barely audible over the din. "There's a rumor going around, though. Heard it from one of the new guys." "Oh, and what's this rumor say?" "That we're all getting promoted to middle management." Not quite. Word is, the Drolk are spooked." "Spooked? By what?" "The sight of their own faces in a mirror." Rallo's expression was serious, a rarity that caught Soren's attention. "By us. By what we can do." Soren raised an eyebrow. "What we can do? Last I checked, we're not exactly shooting lasers out of our eyes." "Not yet," Rallo said, a sly grin spreading across his face. "But there's talk. They say they're scared of our creativity." Soren laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Creativity? What, they think we're going to paint them a nice landscape and blow them up with artistic intent?" Rallo shrugged. "Maybe. They say it's the one thing they can't control." But before Soren could respond, a shadow fell over them, accompanied by the unmistakable stink of Drolk. Virok, their designated overseer, loomed like a mountain of bad intentions. "Humans," Virok hissed, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Talk less, work more." Soren gave his best attempt at a polite smile, which probably looked more like a grimace. "Of course, Virok. We're just discussing how much we love our jobs." The Drake's eyes narrowed. "Love is irrelevant. Work is all that matters." Soren nodded, keeping his mouth shut for once. The Drolk had a knack for making an example out of anyone who displayed more personality than a cardboard box. Best not to poke the metaphorical bear. As Virok slithered away, Rallo leaned over. "So, about that creativity thing." "Yeah, I think there's something to it." Soren glanced at him, curiosity piqued despite himself. "What have you got in mind, you mad genius?" Rallo grinned, his eyes alight with mischief. "You know that old saying about the pen being mightier than the sword?" "Sure, though last time I checked, pens don't do much against laser rifles." "True, but what about a plan?" Soren raised an eyebrow. "A plan? Yeah, a real, honest-to-God plan. Something they won't see coming." Soren considered this, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "You really think we've got a chance?" Rallo shrugged. "Can't be any worse than what we've got now. Besides, what's the worst that can happen? We die horribly." "Exactly, which is pretty much par for the course around here." Soren chuckled. "All right, I'm in, but if we're going out, let's do it with style." Rallo's grin widened. "Style it is." As they returned to their work, Soren couldn't shake the feeling of something stirring in his chest. Hope, maybe, or indigestion, hard to tell these days. Hours passed, a blur of sweat and toil, until finally, the shift ended with the blare of a siren that could wake the dead. The humans, a ragtag collection of the downtrodden and the defiant, shuffled back to their quarters, a cavernous space that felt more like a tomb than a home. Soren collapsed onto his bunk, the thin mattress doing little to cushion his aching bones. Across from him, Rallo lay sprawled out, staring at the ceiling as if it held the secrets of the universe. "You ever think about what you'd do if you got out of here?" Soren asked, his voice soft in the gloom. Rallo was silent for a moment, lost in thought. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'd dance." Soren blinked. "Dance? Yeah. You ever seen those vids of the old Earth dances? The way they move, like they're defying gravity. Like they're free, even if just for a moment." Soren sighed, a wistful smile tugging at his lips. "I used to dance, you know. Before all this." Rallo turned his head, curiosity etched on his face. "Really? What kind?" "All kinds," Soren replied, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Ballet, contemporary, whatever you can think of." "Bet you were good." "I was all right," Soren said, shrugging off the compliment. "But that was a lifetime ago." Rallo chuckled. "Well, maybe you'll get the chance to show off those moves again." Soren smiled, a crooked thing that felt foreign on his face. "Yeah, maybe." As they drifted into an uneasy sleep, the air was filled with the distant hum of machinery, a lullaby of industry and oppression. But in the darkness, a spark flickered, a tiny flame of rebellion that refused to be snuffed out. The next morning, the routine was the same predictable hell. Soren and Rallo were back at it, the grind relentless as ever. But today, there was something new in the air, a tension that hinted at change, like the moment before a storm breaks. Virok was making his rounds, his expression as inviting as a pit of vipers. "Humans," he barked, his voice a weapon all its own. "Efficiency is down. Explain." Rallo stepped forward, his manner as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "Well, you see, Virok, the thing is, we're not robots. We need a little more than gruel and despair to keep us going." Soren held his breath, waiting for the hammer to fall. But Virok merely glowered, his eyes unreadable. "Enough," Virok snapped. "Back to work, all of you." As the Drolk moved on, Soren let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "You're going to get yourself killed one of these days, Rallo." "Probably," Rallo said, unbothered. "But not today. Today's for living." As the day dragged on, Soren found himself lost in thought, the seeds of rebellion taking root in his mind. Creativity, they said, the one thing the Drolk feared. Maybe there was something to it, after all. By the time the shift ended, Soren was ready to collapse. But as he and Rallo made their way back to their quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. "Something big." "Hey," Rallo said, nudging him. "You still thinking about that plan?" Soren nodded, his resolve hardening like steel. "Yeah, I think it's time we showed these bastards what humans are really made of." Rallo grinned, a wicked gleam in his eyes. "Let's give 'em hell." As they lay in their bunks that night, the silence was heavy with unspoken promises and shared dreams. They might be trapped on this godforsaken rock, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. And as Soren drifted into sleep, he dreamed of dancing, of leaping into the air, unbound by gravity, free as the wind. And for a moment, he was truly free. The next day dawned with the same oppressive heat, but Soren felt lighter, as if he'd shed a weight he'd been carrying for too long. Rallo was beside him, a constant presence that was both comforting and infuriating. "Ready to make some noise?" Rallo asked, his voice low and charged with excitement. "More than ready," Soren replied, feeling a thrill of anticipation. Together, they moved through the crowd of weary humans, spreading the word. Quietly, carefully, so as not to alert the Drolk. But the message was clear, it was time to fight back. By the end of the day, the air was electric with tension. The humans were ready, their spirits lifted by the promise of rebellion. And as Soren stood there, surrounded by his fellow slaves, he felt a sense of belonging he'd forgotten existed. They were in this together, and together, they would take back their freedom. The Drolk had no idea what was coming, but they would soon enough. As the sirens sounded, marking the end of the shift, Soren turned to Rallo, a fierce determination in his eyes. "Let's dance," he said. Rallo grinned, his own resolve burning bright. "Let's." The oppressive heat had a personal vendetta against Soren's sanity. Each drop of sweat trickling down his spine was one more reason to hate this miserable rock. Mercury, where the air was thick as porridge and the Drolk ruled with the charm of a sandpaper handshake. As he scratched at the grime embedded under his nails, he spotted something glinting under a pile of discarded scrap, an old holo projector, half buried and forgotten. "Hey, Rallo," Soren called, prying the device free. "Got something here that ain't covered in rust. Must be our lucky day." Rallo shuffled over, wiping his hands on his tattered pants. "If that thing plays porn, I might just propose on the spot." Soren snorted. "We should be so lucky." Nah, looks more like one of those old entertainment models. Rallo raised an eyebrow. So, it's not gonna improve our love lives, but maybe it'll kill a few hours of misery. Fair trade. They tinkered with the device, coaxing it to life with the kind of tender brutality that came naturally to those long accustomed to things breaking down. The holo projector sputtered, flickered, and then, against all odds, projected an image into the air. Dancers, their bodies moving with a fluid grace that mocked the sluggishness of Mercury's oppressive gravity. It was an interpretive dance, the performers twisting and leaping with such freedom that Soren's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the grime, the sweat, the weight of oppression, all of it faded away, replaced by a world where bodies defied the very planet that tried to crush them. Rallo whistled low. Well, I'll be damned. Makes everything else look like we're moving through molasses. Soren nodded, a slow grin spreading across his face. You know, there might be something to this. What, you planning on forming a dance troupe? 'Cause I gotta say, I'd pay good credits to see V-Rock try and do a pirouette. Not quite, Soren said, the kernel of an idea taking root. But think about it, this could be our way out. If we can get the others to see what I'm thinking. Rallo's eyes widened with understanding. You want to use dance as a distraction? More than that, as a weapon. They're scared of our creativity, right? Well, let's give them a show they won't forget. Rallo scratched his head, a devilish glint in his eyes. All right, you mad bastard. I'm in, but we'll need more than just the two of us flailing around like drunkards. Thus began the recruitment drive, the most dangerous HR activity in the galaxy. They needed allies, people with more than just a knack for surviving this hellhole. Each had to bring something unique to the table, a special kind of insanity to match their own. First was Tavi, a wiry engineer with a penchant for making things explode, often unintentionally. You want me to join your merry band of misfits, she said, eyeing them with suspicion. More like a dance troupe with a death wish, Rallo corrected, his grin wide. Interested, depends. How many ways are there for this to go wrong? Soren shrugged. Endless. But if we pull it off, we might just stick it to the Drelk. Tavi considered this, then nodded. All right, count me in, but if I end up dead, I'm haunting your asses. Next was Bale, a towering brute of a man with a talent for making others see things his way. Dance? You serious? He rumbled, his voice like gravel sliding down a chute. Deadly serious, Soren replied. We need someone to keep the Drelk busy while we perform. Bale scratched his chin. So, like a bouncer? Exactly. And I hear you're the best at bouncing things. Bale's grin was slow and menacing. You heard right. All right, I'm in. But if this turns into a tea party, I'm out. Finally, they approached Mira, a sharp-eyed woman known for her uncanny ability to slip past Drelk patrols. You need someone to scout ahead, I'm guessing, she said, her gaze piercing. Exactly, Rallo replied, and maybe grab us some extra supplies while you're at it. Mira smirked. Well, if it means making those leather-skinned bastards look stupid, I'm game. With their unlikely crew assembled, the plan began to take shape. Under the guise of practicing for a cultural showcase, a concept so ludicrous that the Drelk barely gave it a second thought, they started their rehearsals. Soren took to it like a fish to water, rediscovering a part of himself he'd thought buried under layers of despair. The others were less graceful, but what they lacked in finesse, they made up for in enthusiasm. Even Bale, whose attempts at dancing were akin to a bear on roller skates, gave it his all. As they practiced, the Drake's grip tightened, their paranoia palpable. V-Rock loomed more frequently, his many eyes watching with the suspicion of a prison warden who knows his charges are up to something but can't quite prove it. Humans, V-Rock hissed during one inspection, his tone a mix of annoyance and genuine confusion. What is this activity? It's called dancing, V-Rock, Soren replied, his smile all teeth. A little something to lift our spirits. V-Rock's gaze was unblinking, reptilian. Spirits are irrelevant. Work is, all that matters. Yeah, we know, Rallo interjected, boredom dripping from his words. But even you must get bored watching us sweat all day. The Drelk narrowed his eyes, but seemed to file the matter away for later. Once he slithered off, Mira whispered, he's gonna catch on sooner or later. Soren nodded, which is why we need to be ready. Tavi, how's the special effects coming along? Tavi smirked, her fingers stained with various unidentifiable substances. Let's just say, when we go out, it's gonna be with more than just a bang. As the days passed, the atmosphere grew thicker with tension, but also with anticipation. The humans worked, and danced, and plotted, each movement a step closer to freedom, or at least chaos. On the eve of their performance, Soren gathered the group, a motley crew bound by desperation and a shared hatred of their overseers. All right, folks, he said, casting his gaze over them. Tomorrow's our big day. Remember the plan, stick to your roles, and whatever you do, don't get caught. Rallo clapped a hand on his shoulder. Just think, tomorrow we could be free. Or dead. Either way, it'll be a change. Bale let out a low chuckle. You've got away with words, Rallo. Why thank you, big guy. I do try. As they settled in for the night, Soren found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Beside him, Rallo snored softly, blissfully unaware, or simply choosing not to care. Typical. Soren sighed, turning his thoughts to the holo recording, the dancers who seemed to defy the very laws of nature. Maybe they were about to do the same, albeit in a less graceful manner. He glanced over at Rallo, who stirred and mumbled, You worrying about tomorrow? Yeah, aren't you? Nah, worrying's just paying interest on a debt you might not owe. Soren chuckled despite himself. That's one way to look at it. Rallo turned, his eyes half open, and grinned. Relax, Soren. Tomorrow, we dance. After that, whatever happens, we'll deal with it. With that, he rolled over and promptly resumed snoring. Soren lay back, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, they'd gamble with their lives, a wager against the odds stacked so high that even the stars might have laughed at their folly. And yet, beneath the fear and uncertainty, a flicker of hope remained. They were human, after all, stubborn, resilient, and far too reckless for their own good. When dawn finally broke, the usual siren blared its miserable greeting, but today, the air was different. It was charged, like the silent seconds before a storm unleashes its fury. The humans moved with purpose, their minds focused on the task at hand, their hearts set on defiance. Soren and his crew gathered in the designated area, the stage for their final act. V-Rock was there, his gaze suspicious as ever. What is this? He demanded, gesturing to the makeshift stage. It's a cultural showcase, remember? Soren replied, his voice light and easy. Figured we'd show you what humans are really capable of. V-Rock's eyes narrowed. You test my patience, human. Just wait, Rallo said, his grin sharp as a blade. You ain't seen nothing yet. As the performance began, Soren felt a strange calm settle over him. The music, piped through the ancient holo device, was a haunting echo of a long-dead world, but it was enough. They moved as one, a ragtag collection of rebels, each step a defiance of the gravity that sought to hold them down. The Drelk watched, their interest piqued despite themselves. They might have felt superior in every conceivable way, but when it came to creativity, to the artistry of movement, the humans had them beat hands down. Tavi's special effects kicked in, bursts of light and sound that turned the performance into a spectacle. Bale stood guard, his presence a silent threat to any who dared interrupt. Mira wove through the crowd, her eyes sharp for any sign of trouble. The performance built to a crescendo, each movement a calculated risk, a daring leap that defied the laws of nature. And then, as the final notes echoed, the plan set in motion. Soren gave the signal. Tavi's explosives, cleverly hidden, detonated in a series of controlled bursts, chaos unfolding with theatrical flair. The humans scattered, their escape routes meticulously planned. Bale bulldozed through any Drelk unfortunate enough to get in his way, while Mira led the others through the chaos. In the midst of it all, Soren and Rallo remained, the eye of the storm, making sure their people got clear. Well, how about that? Rallo shouted over the din. We might actually pull this off. Don't jinx it, Soren replied, adrenaline coursing through his veins. As the dust settled and the Drelk scrambled to regain control, Soren felt a moment of pure, unadulterated freedom. They might be outnumbered, outgunned, and out of their minds, but for now, they were free. Soren stood in the dingy corner of what passed for a recreation room on this dustball of a planet and watched as his ragtag crew of soon-to-be revolutionaries stumbled around like drunken marionettes. Looking good, team, he shouted over the cacophony of clumsily synchronized stomping. Just try not to break anything before we break out of this dump. Or break each other, Rallo added helpfully, narrowly dodging Bale's flailing arm. Who knew dance was a contact sport? Tavi snorted from her perch atop a stack of crates, her fingers busy piecing together some kind of contraption that looked like it had a 50-50 chance of exploding. This is more like a three-legged race with four-legged people. At least we're not doing this on actual legs, Mira muttered, slipping across the floor as if propelled by some anti-gravity trickery. Her eyes scanned the room, sharp as ever, keeping tabs on the roaming Drelk with more eyes than common sense. Their surroundings were less of a rehearsal space and more of a forgotten storage room, with walls that had seen better centuries and floors that probably had more grime than actual metal. It was a perfect place for their clandestine activities, forgotten by everyone but those desperate enough to squeeze some hope out of the airless pit of Mercury. The Drelk have increased their patrols, Mira warned, her voice low. If they catch us, They'll have us scrubbing air filters for the rest of our short, miserable lives. Bale chuckled deeply, the sound like gravel being poured over a metal sheet. I'd like to see them try. I'll bounce them so hard they'll wish they were born without legs. Ah, the gentle art of diplomacy, Soren quipped, wiping sweat from his brow. First lesson, don't get caught. Second lesson, if you do get caught, blame Bale. The group laughed, though the humor was tinged with the kind of manic desperation you find in the eyes of gamblers about to bet everything on a pair of twos. The stakes were high, and not just because Mercury was about as forgiving as a vengeful ex with a grudge. The holo projector in the corner flickered, struggling to project a ghostly figure performing a routine that was far beyond their current capabilities. Still, it was their blueprint, a relic from Earth long lost to them. The allure of it kept them practicing, even though they knew their performance would resemble a synchronized seizure more than a dance. Rallo clapped his hands, trying to get everyone's attention. All right, focus up, people. We ain't here to win any beauty contests, we're here to stick it to the Drulk and maybe, just maybe, get out from under their many-eyed gaze. If it doesn't work out, we've got a backup plan, Tavi said, nodding to the small explosives she was assembling, each one more precarious than the last. Yeah, plan B, Soren said with a grin. Boom. Let's just hope plan A doesn't turn into plan B by accident, Mira quipped, eyeing Tavi's handiwork with the kind of skepticism reserved for amateur magicians and used starship salesmen. The rehearsals continued, each session a test of their patience, their resolve, and their ability to not throttle each other. The Drake's increased presence added a layer of tension to their already fraught situation, every practice session a roll of the dice. But they had no shortage of motivation. The Drulk ruled with a fist so iron-fisted it could crack planets. Their mere presence sucked the air out of every room, figuratively, of course, since Mercury's atmosphere already did a fine job of that literally. One day, as Soren watched Bale attempt a particularly tricky move that involved not flattening Tavi, he reflected on just how far they'd come. No, they weren't graceful, and yes, Bale looked like he was trying to wrestle an invisible octopus, but damn it, they were showing up. They were trying. And in a place as bleak as Mercury, sometimes showing up was the hardest part. Rallo sidled up next to him, eyes fixed on their motley crew. Think we'll actually pull it off? He asked, voice tinged with just the right amount of sarcasm to mask genuine concern. Soren shrugged. If not, at least we'll have given the Drulk a memory worth replaying on their intergalactic YouTube equivalent. Humans, coming soon to a what not to do video near you, Rallo said, chuckling. Their banter was easy, a language they both spoke fluently, half hope, half gallows humor. It was how they'd survived this long, on a planet that made hell look like a vacation spot. The days blurred together in a haze of sweaty practice sessions and whispered planning meetings. Each step, each stumble, brought them closer to their goal. They communicated through dance, through slight hand gestures and a stubborn refusal to give in to their oppressive reality. As the inevitable performance date approached, Soren stood in front of his crew, their faces a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. All right, everyone, this is it, our last chance to mess up before the real deal. Pressure, what pressure? Tavi said, feigning nonchalance as she fiddled with a detonator that looked far too delicate for comfort. The Drulk will have their eyes on us, Mira reminded them, her gaze sharp enough to cut through the thick air. We need to be perfect. Perfection's overrated, Bale grunted, stretching his arms with enough force to make his muscles audibly creak. Let's just aim for not embarrassing ourselves. Or getting vaporized, Rallo added helpfully. Or that, Bale agreed, eyes glinting with mischief. Soren clapped his hands for attention. Remember, the dance is just the distraction. The real goal is getting everyone out. Mira, you've got the routes. Mira nodded, a map of the facility burned into her brain, her navigation skills as sharp as her tongue. Routes are set. We slip out during the chaos. Bale, you're on crowd control. Bale cracked his knuckles, an ominous sound that promised pain to any Drulk who crossed him. Consider it handled. And Tavi, Soren continued. You know what to do. Tavi nodded, her eyes gleaming with the kind of wild excitement that could only come from someone about to play with explosives. Oh, it'll be a show to remember. Rallo slapped his hands together, the sound echoing through the small room. Then let's give those leather-bound bastards a performance they'll never forget. Break a leg, Mira said dryly, preferably not one of ours. Despite the gravity, both literal and metaphorical, of their situation, the mood was buoyant. They were on the brink of something big, something that could change everything. A rebellion, wrapped in a performance, sprinkled with a dash of insanity. As they filed out of the room, Soren felt a swell of something he hadn't felt in years, hope. It was fragile, like a glass figurine perched on the edge of a table, but it was there, and it was his. The Drelk had taken much, but they hadn't taken that. With the stage set and their roles clear, all they needed was a miracle, or, at the very least, a minor catastrophe that could pass for one. The day of the performance dawned with Mercury's typical flair. Oppressive heat, crushing gravity, and the sense of doom hanging in the air like a layer of smog. The humans shuffled into their assigned positions, their nerves as taut as guitar strings about to snap. Virok, the Drelk overseer with the demeanor of a particularly irritable headmaster, watched them with his usual suspicion. His many eyes seemed to drink in every detail, as if each blink could reveal the secrets he was certain they were hiding. "What is the purpose of this gathering?" Virok demanded, his voice a low hiss that sent shivers down spines. Soren stepped forward, his smile as brazen as it was inscrutable. "A little cultural exchange, remember? We thought you might enjoy a taste of Earth." "Enjoy," Virok repeated, the word foreign on his forked tongue. "Well, enjoy might be a strong word," Rallo said, clapping Soren on the back. "Let's settle for tolerate, and call it a win." Virok's eyes narrowed, suspicion etched on every leathery fold of his skin. "Humans and your meaningless rituals," he scoffed, gesturing for them to proceed. As the music began, a low thrumming hum from the ancient holo projector, Soren felt a surge of adrenaline. The beat was a pulse, a heartbeat driving him forward. Each movement was precise, each step a testament to hours of practice under the watchful glare of their alien overlords. The Drelk watched, a study in disdain and grudging curiosity. Their leathery faces betrayed nothing, but their eyes, dozens of them, followed every sway, every leap, with unblinking intensity. Then, as planned, Tavi's special effects kicked in. Lights flashed, smoke billowed, and the dance turned into a spectacle worthy of a grand stage. It was chaos, but it was their chaos, controlled, orchestrated, a rebellion wrapped in rhythm. Bale moved through the throng like a wrecking ball, clearing a path for their escape. Mira darted ahead, a ghost in the shadows, leading the others toward freedom. Amid the pandemonium, Soren and Rallo held their ground, ensuring their people got clear. It was a gamble, a reckless wager against the house, but it was all they had. "We're actually doing it," Rallo shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. "Let's hope we don't live to regret it," Soren replied, adrenaline and fear battling for dominance in his veins. As the final notes of the performance echoed, the plan was set in motion. Tavi's hidden explosives detonated with theatrical aplomb, a series of controlled blasts that sent the Drelk scrambling. In the midst of the chaos, Soren caught Virok's eye. The Drake's expression was one of shock, disbelief that these insignificant humans had pulled one over on him. "Humans," Virok snarled, his voice a mixture of rage and grudging respect. "You think this will save you?" "Maybe not," Soren replied, his smile defiant. "But it'll sure make life interesting." And with that, amid the smoke and the chaos, they made their escape. Behind them, the Drelk howled their frustration, but for once, it was the humans who had the last laugh. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they were free, if only for a moment. The recreation room was as stale and uninviting as ever, a testament to Mercury's hospitality. The crew gathered, the air heavy with anticipation. Soren leaned against the wall, arms crossed, projecting a confidence he didn't quite feel. The Drelk had announced their latest scheme. A relocation plan to scatter the humans across different sectors. Divide and conquer, alien style. It would dissolve their group faster than a sugar cube in hot tea. "Relocation," Rallo said, spinning the word like it was a bad taste he couldn't spit out. "Sounds like a fancy way of saying, screw you, humans." "Yeah," Bale grunted, cracking his knuckles with a noise like gunfire. "First they make us dance, now they want us to play musical chairs." Soren cleared his throat, calling for attention. "All right, listen up. We've got a week before the Drelk start splitting us up like a bad divorce. We need a new plan, something bold, something that'll make those leather-skinned bastards wish they'd never heard of humans." "Bold, huh?" Mira raised an eyebrow, her expression caught somewhere between skepticism and curiosity. "Got something clever up your sleeve? Or is this more of your usual, wing it and pray, approach?" "Both, actually," Soren said with a grin. "We're gonna put on another show, but this time, it's not just a distraction. It's our ticket out." Rallo snorted. "Great, nothing says escape like a poorly coordinated flash mob." "It's not just that," Tavi chimed in, her eyes bright with mischief. "We're gonna use the performance to mask our movements. While they're gawking at us, we slip out and make a run for the transport bay." "Transport bay?" Bale asked, his voice incredulous. "You do realize it's the most guarded part of the facility, right?" "That's why it's perfect," Mira said with a smirk. "They won't expect us to be that brazen. Or that stupid," Rallo added, shooting Soren a sideways glance. "No offense." None taken, Soren replied, shrugging. Look, it's risky, but it's a hell of a lot better than waiting around to be separated. Risky is an understatement, Mira noted, her sharp gaze cutting through the room like a laser. If they catch us, they won't bother relocating. They'll just make an example out of us. Then we don't get caught, Soren said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Silence settled over the group, each member lost in their own thoughts. It was a big gamble, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The Drelk had a way of turning rebellion into spectacle, and being the star of such a show was no one's idea of fun. Bale broke the silence, his voice a rumble of reluctant resolve. All right, I'm in. Someone's got to make sure you idiots don't get yourselves killed. Tavi grinned. And someone's got to make sure the explosions are well timed. Mira nodded, her expression thoughtful. I'll handle navigation. Get us to the transport bay without running into Drelk patrols. Well then, Rallo said, clapping his hands together. Looks like we've got ourselves a plan. A stupid, insane, probably doomed plan. But it's a plan. Stupid plans are my specialty, Soren said, unable to keep the grin off his face. Let's make it happen. The days leading up to the performance were a blur of rehearsals, sabotage preparations, and whispered strategy meetings. Each session was a delicate dance of its own, balancing the need for secrecy with the urgency of their escape. The group had their doubts, of course. Planning an escape right under the noses of their alien overlords was the kind of foolishness that usually ended with a shallow grave and a lot of, I told you so's. But for the crew, doubt was just another ingredient in their survival stew. On the last night before the performance, they gathered for one final run-through. The room was thick with tension, the air almost crackling with anticipation. All right, this is it, Soren said, his voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at his insides. Tomorrow, we put on the show of our lives. Or the last show of our lives, Rallo quipped, always one to find the dark lining in a silver cloud. Let's aim for option A, Mira said dryly. I'm not ready to be a martyr just yet. And Tavi, Soren continued. You've got the explosives ready? Tavi nodded, patting the satchel at her side. Just enough boom to keep them distracted. Not enough to get us all roasted. Good, Soren said, taking a deep breath. Let's make this count. The morning of the performance arrived with Mercury's usual indifferent blaze. The crew gathered in their makeshift dressing room, tension hanging over them like a storm cloud. Each of them donned their costumes, a hodgepodge of ragged clothes and makeshift masks, designed more to obfuscate than entertain. Nerves were raw, the reality of their plans settling in with the weight of a dozen Drelk eyes. They were about to bet everything on a performance that was only half about art and all about audacity. The door to the performance hall opened, and they were ushered in, the Drelk guards eyeing them with disdainful curiosity. Virok stood at the center, his many eyes tracking their every move. Another one of your human rituals? He asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Something like that, Soren replied, giving the alien a smile that was more teeth than warmth. Thought you might appreciate a little culture. Culture, Virok repeated, the word wrapped in disbelief. Well, if you don't like it, you can always leave, Rallo suggested with a mock-friendly wave. Virok's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Proceed. The performance began, each movement carefully choreographed to conceal their true intentions. The Drelk watched, their leathery faces inscrutable, but their eyes, always the eyes, followed every twist and turn. As they danced, the crew subtly shifted into position. Mira slipped into the shadows, her movements fluid and unnoticed. Bale, Tavi, and Rallo took their places, each one ready for their part in the escape. The music rose, building to a crescendo that signaled the beginning of their plan. Tavi's devices went off with theatrical precision, a series of small explosions that sent a ripple of confusion through the Drelk ranks. In the chaos, Mira led the way, her route meticulously planned to avoid patrols and cameras. The tension was palpable, each step a gamble, each breath a test of their resolve. They moved through the facility with an urgency born of necessity, slipping past guards and checkpoints with a combination of luck and skill. The transport bay loomed ahead, its door a beacon of hope and escape. This is it, Mira whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. Once we're through, there's no turning back. Wouldn't have it any other way, Bale replied, his voice a rumble of determination. Rallo glanced back, a crooked smile on his face. Let's hope our luck holds. Soren nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. They were close, so close. But close only counted in horseshoes and hand grenades, and they needed to be more than close. They needed to be free. With a final, collective breath, they charged the transport bay, a desperate sprint toward freedom. It was a dance of its own, a chaotic, beautiful mess that defied the odds and the expectations of their alien overseers. The door slid open, and they were through, the other side a promise of escape. Behind them, the Drelk shouted in confusion and anger, their voices a cacophony of disbelief. As they boarded the transport, Soren glanced back, catching one last glimpse of Vrok's furious face. Humans, Vrok spat, his voice a mixture of rage and grudging admiration. You think this will last? Who knows, Soren replied, a defiant grin on his face. But at least we've got a head start. With that, they were off, the transport bay fading into the distance. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they were moving towards something that wasn't a dead end. Inside the transport, the mood was electric, a volatile mix of relief and disbelief. They'd done it, escaped the clutches of their alien overlords, if only for a moment. Holy shit, Rallo said, his voice a breathless laugh. We actually did it. Don't celebrate just yet, Mira cautioned, though her eyes sparkled with the thrill of their success. We're not out of the woods. But we're out of the cage, Bale replied, a rare smile breaking his usually stoic demeanor. Tavi leaned back, a satisfied grin on her face. I'd call that a win. Soren looked around at his crew, his friends, each one of them battered and exhausted, but alive. They'd defied the odds, stared down the impossible, and somehow, against all logic, they'd come out on top. For now, at least, they were free. It was a precarious freedom, one that could be snatched away at a moment's notice, but it was theirs. And for the first time in a long time, Soren felt that fragile hope bloom into something more. Here's to stupid plans, he said, raising an imaginary glass. May they always work out better than they should. To stupid plans, the others echoed, their voices a chorus of triumph and defiance. And for that fleeting moment, it was enough. The escape had been a short-lived fantasy, the kind that got you drunk on hope only to slap you sober with a harsh dose of reality. The transport hadn't gone far before slamming to a halt, shuddering under the grip of a Drelk disabling beam. It was the kind of rude awakening you'd expect after a particularly good dream, a reminder that even the best-laid plans could turn to absolute shit in the blink of an eye. Soren and the crew found themselves back in the very same facility they'd tried so hard to flee. Only this time, they weren't performers in a play of freedom, but actors in a tragedy of betrayal. Nice of them to roll out the red carpet for us, Rallo muttered as Drelk guards escorted him to a holding cell. It wasn't so much a cell as it was a gravity sinkhole. No bars or locks, just a force field that made your bones feel like they weighed a ton. Clearly, someone on the inside wanted us back, Mira noted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the oppressive air. Her gaze swept over their surroundings, eyes darting from corner to corner like a cornered animal sizing up its cage. Bale clenched his fists, the muscles in his arms bunching like coiled springs. When I find out who ratted us out, I'll introduce them to my favorite pastime, rearranging bone structures. Tavi, ever the optimist, forced a smile. Well, at least we know how much we're worth. Enough to warrant a return ticket, free of charge. Yeah, lucky us, Soren said, his tone drier than Mercury's lifeless plains. The walls of their cell were as comforting as a Drake's hug, cold, unyielding, and about as welcoming as a death sentence. The holo projector buzzed to life, Vrok's face stretching across the screen with more eyes than expressions. If you could call that leathery scowl an expression. Humans, Vrok began, his voice oozing disdain. Did you really believe you could escape? Rallo gave a half-hearted shrug. Worth a shot. Ever tried breaking out of a prison you run? No, didn't think so. Your insolence is noted, Vrok said, not missing a beat. But it's pointless. You will remain here, under our watchful eyes. Eyes being the operative word, Mira chimed in, her sarcasm a shield against hopelessness. Vrok's image flickered, his many eyes narrowing. Your rebellion has been amusing. But let's see how long your spirit holds in confinement. The screen went dark, leaving the crew in a silence heavy with their collective failure. Well, that was uplifting, Tavi said, her voice dripping with irony. Anyone else feel like we're starring in a bad sitcom? More like a tragedy, Mira corrected, her voice a knife's edge. We need to figure out who betrayed us, Soren said, pacing the small confines like a caged predator. Someone sold us out, and we need to know why. Bale's gaze was hard, unyielding. My money's on someone with a taste for Drelk favors. Or someone with a death wish, Rallo added dryly. The days dragged on, each one blending into the next like a monotonous painting of dust and despair. Hope was a fleeting visitor, whispering promises of escape before vanishing into the shadows of doubt. Soren spent most of his time staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the weight of their failure. Each plan, each move, each decision replayed in his mind like a deadly chess game where every piece had been rigged against him from the start. It was during one of these introspective sessions that he caught sight of something, an idea flickering at the edge of his mind. It wasn't the plan of a desperate man, but the musings of an artist, someone who had once believed in the power of expression, even amidst chaos. Guys, Soren said, breaking the silence that had settled like a thick fog. I've been thinking. Congratulations, Rallo replied, his voice a blend of sarcasm and curiosity. Thinking about what exactly? Better ways to fail? Soren ignored the jab, his mind racing with a newfound fervor. About our performance. About what it meant, even if just us. Meant? Mira echoed, raising an eyebrow. You mean beyond being a suicide mission? Yes, exactly, Soren insisted, his voice gaining strength. It was more than just a distraction. It was an act of defiance, an expression of who we are. Expressive dance rebellion, Tavi quipped. That's a new one. No, listen, Soren continued, his eyes alight with conviction. The Drelk may rule over us with their eyes and their power, but they don't understand us. They don't understand our need to be more than just survivors. So, what are you saying? Bale asked, his skepticism palpable. I'm saying that while they may have captured us, they can't take away what we've done. They can't erase the courage we showed or the hope we sparked in ourselves. Our art, our defiance, is something they can't measure or control. Rallo tilted his head, considering Soren's words. Hope's a fragile thing, Soren. It doesn't last long in a place like this. Maybe not, Soren admitted. But it's something, and something is better than nothing. Mira watched him, her expression unreadable. So, what do we do? Perform another show? This time for an audience of none? Not exactly, Soren said, a plan forming in his mind. But we use what we have. Our defiance, our spirit, that's something they can't lock away. Tavi nodded slowly, a spark of mischief returning to her eyes. So, what you're saying is, we keep performing, but in our own way. Exactly, Soren replied, a grin spreading across his face. We turn our confinement into our stage. We keep the spirit alive, even if just for ourselves. Bale crossed his arms, a grudging respect in his gaze. You're a strange one, Soren. But I'll admit, it's a damn good idea. Rallo shrugged, a smirk tugging at his lips. Could be worse. At least it's more entertaining than counting ceiling tiles. The group fell into a rhythm, their confinement becoming less of a sentence and more of an opportunity. They shared stories, created impromptu performances, found humor in the darkest corners of their predicament. And in those moments, they found something unexpected, a resilience that transcended their circumstances. The Drelk could cage their bodies, but they couldn't imprison their spirits. As the days turned into weeks, the crew's jokes became sharper, their laughter louder. They navigated their confinement with a grace born of necessity, using their art as a lifeline, a reminder that even in the bleakest of times, they were unbroken. Soren watched his friends with a mixture of pride and gratitude. They were battered, weary, but they were a force to be reckoned with, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. It wasn't the freedom they had fought for, but it was a freedom of another kind. A freedom of the soul, the kind that couldn't be measured in miles or borders, but in laughter and camaraderie. One evening, as they sat together, sharing stories and dreams of the future, Soren felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't the kind of victory he'd imagined, but it was a victory nonetheless. A victory of hope over despair, of resilience over defeat. Here's to us, Soren said, raising an imaginary glass. The best damn crew in the galaxy. To us, the others echoed, their voices a chorus of triumph and defiance. And for that fleeting moment, it was enough. If there was one thing the Drelk underestimated, it was the human capacity for mischief. Soren and his ragtag band of misfits were living proof of that. Their little gravity sinkhole might have been the size of a shoebox, but it was a stage, and they had a performance to prepare. All right, folks, Soren announced, his voice echoing off the cold, uncaring walls. Time to put on one hell of a show. Rallo snorted. Great, another excuse for us to break a leg, and not in the good luck way. Tavi, ever the optimist, grinned. You never know, Rallo. Maybe we'll break something else this time. Like Drelk morale. Bale cracked his knuckles, or Drelk faces. The plan was simple, which meant it was bound to go to hell in a handbasket. But simplicity had its charm. They didn't have much in terms of resources, no weapons, no tech, not even a decent amount of elbow room. But they had each other, and a spark of rebellion that flickered like a stubborn candle in a hurricane. Mira, the sharpest tongue among them, eyed the room. You sure this will work, Soren? Or is this another one of your stupid plans? Stupid plans are my specialty, Soren replied with a wry smile. But this time, it's not just about us. It's about sending a message. What kind of message? Bale asked, his skepticism hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. The kind that says we're not beaten yet, Soren replied. We may be down, but we're not out. Not by a long shot. The idea was to use their performance to send a coded message to the other human captives, those poor souls trapped in their own personal hells across the facility. A dance, a pantomime of defiance that would signal the start of something bigger. Something the Drult couldn't control. They rehearsed in whispers, their movements careful, deliberate. Each step, each gesture was a word, a sentence in a language only they understood. It was a dance of rebellion, a symphony of defiance without the damn purple prose. Rallo watched Soren, his eyes narrowed. You sure this isn't just a way to get us all killed faster? Maybe, Soren admitted, but better to die on our feet than live on our knees. Good pep talk, Mira said dryly. Shame we don't have a flag to wave. Hours passed in a blur of whispered instructions and silent practice. The gravity sinkhole felt like a pressure cooker, the force field humming with the promise of doom. But the crew moved as one, their shadows flickering against the walls like ghosts. Finally, the moment arrived. The holo projector in the corner of their cell crackled to life, V-Rock's scowl appearing with all the charm of an expired milk carton. His disdainful eyes watched them, unblinking. Humans, V-Rock droned, his voice as oily as ever. Your time is wasted in these futile displays. Soren stepped forward, a grin tugging at his lips. Wasting time is our specialty. Consider it a cultural exchange. V-Rock's eyes narrowed, his leathery skin rippling with annoyance. Your defiance is pointless. You cannot escape us. Maybe not, Tavi chimed in, shrugging. But we can sure as hell annoy you while trying. With that, the crew began their performance. It wasn't a dance so much as a declaration, a physical manifestation of everything they couldn't say with words. Every movement, every twist and turn was a silent scream, a promise that they weren't beaten. The Drult guards watched, confusion playing across their alien features. To them, it was just nonsense, meaningless movements by lesser beings. But to the humans in the facility, it was a message of hope, a rallying cry that spread like wildfire. Think they're getting it? Rallo asked, his voice barely audible over their synchronized movements. They will, Soren replied, his eyes blazing with determination. They have to. The performance continued, a relentless display of unity and resistance. Each step was a challenge, a refusal to accept the chains that bound them. And as the minutes ticked by, something incredible happened. Other humans, those trapped in their own cells, began to respond. Small gestures, subtle movements that mirrored the crew's defiance. It was a ripple effect, a wave of rebellion spreading through the facility. Bale glanced around, his disbelief evident. They're joining in. It's actually working. Soren, Mira said softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. We're not alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope flickered in their hearts. It was a fragile thing, a delicate balance between despair and determination. But it was there, and it was growing stronger by the second. V-Rock's image flickered, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. What is this? Just a little dance, Soren replied, his grin widening. Thought it might liven up the place. The Drult guards exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. To them, it was just a meaningless display, a harmless act by insignificant creatures. But the humans knew better. They knew the power of unity, the strength in numbers. The performance ended, but the message lingered, echoing through the facility like a battle cry. The crew stood together, their defiance etched into their very beings. Well, Rallo said, catching his breath. That was something. It was more than something, Tavi replied, her eyes shining with determination. It was everything. As the holo projector flickered off, leaving them in silence once more, Soren turned to his crew. They were battered, weary, but they were united. A force to be reckoned with, even in the face of overwhelming odds. We've done what we can, Soren said, his voice steady. Now we wait. Mira nodded, a rare smile playing at her lips. And hope for a miracle. The days that followed were tense, each one stretching into eternity. The Drult were on high alert, their many eyes watching every move with suspicion. But the humans held onto their newfound hope, a lifeline in the darkness. Rumors began to spread among the captives, whispers of rebellion and resistance. The crew's performance had ignited something within him, a shared defiance that couldn't be snuffed out. Bale, ever the realist, shook his head. Can't believe this is actually happening. I told you, Soren replied, his voice filled with conviction. Hope is a powerful thing. It's what keeps us going. But hope won't get us out of here, Rallo pointed out, his sarcasm masking a hint of fear. True, Soren admitted, but it gives us a reason to keep fighting. It gives us a purpose. They spent their days planning, whispering strategies and ideas. The guards watched them closely, but the crew was careful, their defiance hidden behind smiles and laughter. As the tension mounted, the crew prepared for whatever lay ahead. They were fighters, survivors, and they would not be broken. Not by the Drelk, not by their circumstances, and certainly not by the oppressive gravity of Mercury. One evening, as they sat together in the dim light of their cell, Soren addressed his friends. "We might not know what tomorrow holds, but we know what we stand for." "And what's that?" Mira asked, her voice laced with both skepticism and hope. "Freedom," Soren replied, his voice unwavering. "For us, for all of us. And we'll get it, one way or another." With those words, the crew knew they were ready. The rebellion had begun, and there was no turning back. They were the spark, the catalyst, and they would see this through to the bitter end. As they drifted off to sleep, the crew held on to their hope, their determination unyielding. They might have been trapped, but their spirits were free, and that was something the Drelk could never take away. The days stretched on, each one a test of patience and resolve. The Drelk watched them like hawks, but the crew remained steadfast, their defiance a fire that refused to be extinguished. And then, one day, something changed. A whisper of opportunity, a chance to turn the tide in their favor. It was the beginning of the end, the start of the final act in their grim dark tale. But they were ready, ready to fight, ready to resist, ready to reclaim their freedom. Whatever the cost. And as the crew prepared to face what lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain: they were not alone. They had each other, and they had hope. And that, in a universe as bleak as theirs, was more than enough. The public ceremony was scheduled for a Tuesday, because even in captivity, the Drelk couldn't resist the bureaucratic urge to ruin everyone's week. It was supposed to be a showcase of human compliance, a demonstration of how well the Drake's divide and conquer strategy had worked. Except, this time, the humans had decided to put on a different kind of show. The transport bay was decked out in the Drelk equivalent of festive decorations. A ghastly array of pulsating lights and metallic streamers that screamed, oppressive regime, more than celebration. The Drelk stood smugly, their many eyes glistening with a self-satisfied sheen that made even the drabbest of party planners look exciting. Soren and his ragtag group were positioned front and center, the supposed stars of this grisly masquerade. The plan was simple: use their performance as a distraction, disable the Drake's systems, and ignite a rebellion that would spread faster than an intergalactic virus. As the holo projector buzzed to life, projecting Vrock's oily visage for all to see, Soren gave his team a reassuring nod. "Remember, this isn't just a dance. It's a distraction." "You mean a death wish?" Rallo muttered, ever the pessimist. Tavi, the ever-present optimist, grinned. "Nah, let's call it a surprise party. Because who doesn't like surprises?" As Mira and Bale joined their ranks, Soren could practically taste the tension in the air. Or maybe that was just the recycled oxygen, who could tell? Vrock's voice echoed through the bay, dripping with condescension. "Humans, you stand here today as a testament to..." Soren cut him off, raising a hand theatrically. Yeah, we get it. We're the stars of your little sideshow. Now, shall we get on with it before my boredom becomes a contagion?" Annoyance flickered across Vrock's projection, but he waved him on with a dismissive gesture. Proceed. And proceed they did. The crew launched into their performance, each movement calculated to convey a message of defiance. It was a choreographed chaos that only the humans understood, a language of rebellion spoken with their bodies. Bale moved with a ferocity that belied his otherwise gruff demeanor. "Can't believe I'm dancing. Hell must be freezing over. Or it's just Mercury's charm," Mira quipped, her sharp tongue undeterred by the situation. As the performance continued, Soren subtly signaled to Tavi, who nodded and slipped into the shadows. Her mission was to reach the control panel and disable the Drake's systems, a task that required more than a little finesse and a whole lot of luck. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew kept the Drake's attention firmly fixed on them. It was like dancing on a knife's edge, every misstep potentially fatal. But somehow, amidst the chaos, a sense of camaraderie bound them together, a shared defiance that made every movement feel like a punch thrown against their captors. Rallo spun on his heel, narrowly avoiding a stumble. "Anyone else feel like we're just one misstep away from becoming a cautionary tale?" Mira smirked. "Aren't we already?" At the control panel, Tavi was a whirlwind of motion, her fingers flying over the keys with an urgency that matched the pounding of her heart. The Drelk had underestimated her once, and she was determined to make them pay for it. "Come on, Tavi," she muttered to herself, hacking into the system with a confidence that masked her nerves. "You're the only thing standing between us and a lifetime of alien karaoke." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a low hum vibrated through the bay as the Drake's systems began to falter. It was the signal they'd been waiting for. Soren caught Rallo's eye and nodded. Now, the crew shifted their performance, their movements more pronounced and defiant. It was a call to arms, a rallying cry that spread through the crowd of humans like wildfire. The Drelk guards exchanged confused glances, their many eyes blinking in unison as the humans around them began to rise, their oppressor's distraction the perfect opportunity for rebellion. Bale cracked his knuckles, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Time to give these bastards a taste of their own medicine. Vrock's projection flickered, his frustration palpable. What is happening? Guards, contain them. But it was too late. The humans surged forward, a tide of pent-up rage and desperation sweeping through the transport bay. The guards, caught off guard by the sheer force of their defiance, struggled to maintain control. Amidst the chaos, Soren moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the room for the next opportunity. They needed to disable the transport shields and get off this godforsaken rock. Rallo appeared at his side, breathless but determined. You better have a plan, Soren. I didn't sign up for a suicide mission. Relax, Soren replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. It's more of a high-risk, low-survival mission. Totally different. Together, they fought their way toward the control room, where Tavi was already at work bypassing the transport shields. The Drake's technology might have been advanced, but it was no match for human ingenuity, or sheer stubbornness. As they reached the control room, Tavi gave them a triumphant grin. Took you long enough. Thought I'd have to save the universe all by myself. We can't let you have all the fun, Rallo quipped, taking up position beside her. With the transport shields disabled, the path to freedom lay open. But the Drolk weren't giving up without a fight. Vrock's voice echoed through the bay, a last-ditch attempt to reassert control. Humans, cease this madness. You cannot win. Soren stepped forward, his voice carrying over the din of battle. Maybe not today, but we're sure as hell going to make you regret underestimating us. With the humans rallying behind them, the crew pushed forward, determined to seize their chance at freedom. It was a battle of attrition, each side fighting tooth and nail for control. Mira joined them, her eyes blazing with fierce determination. Let's show these aliens what happens when you back humanity into a corner. The transport bay was a maelstrom of chaos, the Drake's futile attempts to regain control only fueling the humans' resolve. It was a testament to the power of defiance, a living, breathing embodiment of everything they'd fought for. As the crew made their final push, Vrock's projection flickered, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. You will not escape, Soren chuckled, his voice laced with defiance. Watch us. With one final, concerted effort, the humans overpowered the Drelk, their captors' technological superiority no match for the raw determination of those who'd had enough of being oppressed. The transport bay fell silent, the echoes of battle replaced by a victorious cheer that reverberated through the facility. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd turned the tide and regained control. As the crew regrouped, breathless but jubilant, Soren looked around at his friends, his voice filled with a sense of triumph. We did it. We're free. Bale, ever the realist, crossed his arms, a grin tugging at his lips. Now let's get the hell out of here before they change their minds. With the transport shields down and the Drelk in disarray, the humans made their way to the ships, their hearts pounding with the thrill of freedom. It was a sweet victory, the culmination of their defiance and determination. As they boarded the ships, Tavi paused, looking back at the facility they'd called home for far too long. I can't believe we're really doing this. Rallo clapped her on the back, a rare smile on his face. Believe it, Tavi, we're out of here. With the engines roaring to life, the ships lifted off, leaving the bleak landscape of Mercury behind. The humans had escaped, their spirits unbroken and their resolve unyielding. As they soared through the stars, the crew gathered in the cockpit, the thrill of victory still coursing through their veins. It was a new beginning, a chance to start anew in a universe that had tried to break them but failed miserably. Soren turned to his friends, his voice steady and filled with determination. This is just the start. We have a lot of work to do, and a lot of people to help. Mira nodded, her sharp tongue momentarily softened by the weight of what they'd accomplished. And we'll do it together. Bale cracked his knuckles, a determined glint in his eyes. Let's show the universe what happens when you mess with humanity. Tavi grinned, her optimism shining through. We've got a long road ahead, but at least now, it's our road to travel. Rallo, ever the cynic, shrugged. Well, if we're going to be stuck together, we might as well make the most of it. As they sped through the stars, the crew knew they were far from finished. But they'd faced the impossible and come out the other side stronger than ever. They were not just survivors, they were a force to be reckoned with, and they would not rest until the Drake's hold on humanity was broken for good. With the universe stretching out before them, the crew set their sights on the future, their spirits unbowed and their hearts filled with hope. They were free, and they would fight to keep it that way. And as they journeyed into the unknown, one thing was certain. With friends like these, anything was possible. Even in the darkest corners of space, their light would shine, a beacon of defiance in a universe that had forgotten what it meant to be truly alive. The transport bay echoed with the kind of silence that only comes after an epic ass-kicking. It was the same deafening quiet that follows a bar brawl when everyone is too stunned to decide whether to cheer or call the cops. Soren stood. The aftermath of their rebellion spread around him like the world's messiest art installation. Well, that was something, Bale muttered, looking around at the unconscious Drulk sprawled like ugly rugs. Guess Vrok's going to need a lifetime supply of aspirin. He's going to need more than aspirin, Soren replied, stepping over a particularly crumpled guard. Maybe some humility, but let's be real, he's more likely to find a unicorn on this rusty rock. Tavi, still buzzing with the adrenaline of her system's hack, joined them. Her eyes sparkled with the kind of glee that only comes from outsmarting your captors. Did you see Vrok's face? Looked like someone told him his favorite pet project was a colossal failure. Oh wait, yeah, a real shocker there, Rallo chimed in, rubbing his hands together as though warming up for a stand-up routine. You think they'll name this mess after us? The Great Human Houdini Act. Maybe we can get our own day off in the calendar. Don't underestimate Humans Day. Sure, Rallo, Mira said, her sarcasm as sharp as a drake's talon. We'll get a parade, streamers, bands, the whole 9 yards. Right after they finish plotting their revenge. Soren shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Alright, enough celebrating. We've got work to do. Can't sit around admiring our own handiwork like some narcissistic artists. Bale rubbed his chin, pondering their next move. So, what's the master plan, fearless leader? Or did we just wing it so well you're hoping for a repeat performance? Soren leaned against a console, the weight of leadership pressing down heavier than Mercury's gravity. We need to spread the word. Let the universe know we're not just pretty faces and dance moves. Broadcasting our story, huh? Tavi's fingers twitched, already itching to hijack another system. I'm down for that. Just point me at a communication console, and I'll do the rest. Rallo crossed his arms, his perpetual skepticism on full display. You think anyone out there actually gives a damn about a bunch of scrappy humans on Mercury? We're the intergalactic equivalent of a footnote. Yeah, but we're a damn interesting footnote, Soren countered. And if there's one thing the universe loves, it's a good underdog story. Might even inspire a few more rebellions. Mira rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her grin. You really think we can kick off a galaxy-wide revolution from here? I mean, it's not like we're the Rebel Alliance or anything. Exactly, Bale added, his tone dripping with irony. We don't have a fancy starship or a chosen one, just a bunch of misfits and a planet that couldn't care less if we vanished tomorrow. We don't need lightsabers or destiny, Soren said, pushing off the console. We've got guts, and sometimes, that's all you need. With renewed determination, the crew made their way to the facility's main communication hub. It was a misfits march, a ragtag parade of the disgruntled and the defiant. Tavi quickly set to work, her fingers dancing over the controls like a maestro conducting a symphony of rebellion. All right, folks, she said, her voice echoing through the facility's speakers. Time to make some noise. Soren stepped up beside her, his gaze steady as he addressed the universe, or at least whoever might be listening. This is Soren, leader of what used to be the Drake's favorite sideshow. We've kicked our captors to the curb, and it's time the rest of you did the same. Humans are more than just labor and cannon fodder. We're fighters, and we're not going to stop until every last one of our kind is free. Rallo shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. Damn, Soren, with a speech like that, you'd think you actually know what you're doing. Fake it, till you make it, right? Soren replied, a hint of a smile breaking through his usual stoicism. As the broadcast streamed out into the void, the crew couldn't help but wonder if their message would reach anyone. Would it stir others to action or simply fade into the background noise of the cosmos? Even if no one hears it, Tavi said, we know what we did here today. And that's got to count for something. Yeah, Bale agreed, cracking his knuckles. At the very least, it'll give those Drulk bastards something to think about next time they try this kind of stunt. Mira nodded, her usual sarcasm tempered by a rare moment of sincerity. We've shown them that humans aren't just here to roll over and take it. We're here to fight back. Soren leaned against the communication console, letting the weight of their accomplishment settle over him. We've done something incredible, he said, his voice carrying the gravity of their victory. We've turned our art into something more. Something powerful. It's a symbol of hope, not just for us, but for everyone out there still trapped. Rallo snorted, his skepticism never far from the surface. Hope, huh, guess that's one way to look at it. Personally, I'm just glad we finally found a way to stick it to them. Hope or not, Soren said, we've got a long road ahead. But at least now, it's our road. With Mercury's bleak landscape receding behind them, the crew set their sights on the stars. It was a new beginning, and while they had no idea what lay ahead, they knew they would face it together. "Let's get moving," Soren said, clapping Bale on the back. "We've got a universe to wake up." As the ships cruised through the darkness of space, the crew settled into their new reality. It was a mix of uncertainty and optimism, a precarious balance that only the truly rebellious could appreciate. "Bet the Drelk didn't see this coming," Tavi said, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "All their fancy tech and they got outwitted by a bunch of humans with a flair for the dramatic." "Just goes to show," Rallo mused, "you can have all the eyes in the universe, but if you're blind to human ingenuity, you're screwed." Mira chuckled, shaking her head. "You know, I actually think we might just pull this off." "Of course, we will," Soren said, his confidence unshaken. "We've come too far to back down now." As they hurtled through the vastness of space, the crew reflected on their journey. They'd faced impossible odds and come out on top, proving to themselves, and anyone else paying attention, that humans were more than just pawns in someone else's game. "We've got a chance to change things," Soren said, his voice filled with purpose. "Not just for us, but for everyone still under the Drake's thumb." Bale nodded, a determined glint in his eye. "Let's make sure they never forget the day they underestimated a group of humans from Mercury." The crew shared a moment of silence, each one contemplating the enormity of their task. It was a daunting challenge, but if their journey had taught them anything, it was that they could achieve the impossible, together. "So, where to next, fearless leader?" Tavi asked, her fingers already poised to chart a course. Soren shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Anywhere but here. We've got a lot of work to do and a galaxy to wake up." "Then let's not waste any more time," Mira said, her voice carrying the weight of their shared determination. With their path set and their spirits unyielding, the crew embarked on their mission. They were no longer just a group of rebels from a forgotten planet. They were a force to be reckoned with, a beacon of defiance in an indifferent universe. And as they sped through the stars, one thing was certain. They'd face whatever challenges lay ahead with the same irreverent spirit that had carried them this far. After all, they were more than just survivors, they were human, and that was all they needed to be. "Hey, Soren," Rallo called out, breaking the contemplative silence. "Think we'll ever find a place that serves a decent beer?" Soren laughed, a rare sound that echoed through the cockpit. "One can only hope, Rallo. One can only hope." And so, with hope in their hearts and rebellion in their veins, the crew set their sights on the future, ready to take on whatever the universe threw their way. They'd already achieved the impossible, and they were just getting started.